Morning to everybody. In the first place, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come and share this activity with us in an original session, different faces. The framework is the same. I wanted to share reflections on the process we are building together. We started over 10 years ago in the transformation of the budget process, the budgeting process. This has been rather quiet. I would like to share the history of the path we've covered and tell you about what we will do in the future.
"100 years ago, Uruguay laid the foundation to become a pioneer country. The citizens were the first to access rights. Access to education was for everyone. Our country was able to bring in scientific talents of the world to contribute their knowledge. We developed infrastructure and we opened our window to the world. The entrepreneurial spirit led the way to innovative achievements in a short time. We were a very young country. In the past 100 years, our country has experienced different avatars. Times of growth, setbacks, crises. Even in the most difficult times, Uruguay honored its commitments. Because we are small, we need to adapt to a changing world. The fast pace of global changes require rapid and intelligent adaptive capacity. With that same spirit of our pioneers, today it is we who have the responsibility of giving opportunities to our people. For this, it is essential to create stability and build sustainable public policies to have the people's trust in our country. We have learned that the country's fiscal and financial health is the basis for development.
Uruguay has been working hard to achieve progressively higher levels of economic and social development, and has chosen to follow strategic guidelines to achieve this goal. Firstly, inclusive growth. Secondly, opening the country to the outside world. And thirdly, commitment to quality, a mandatory path to be followed by a geographically small country, but with great potential. There are no successful and sustainable experiences of economic and social development other than those based on macroeconomic systems. It is with this firm conviction that we have been working and have made very profound transformations in different areas, such as the tax system, tax administration, budget management, and public debt administration and management.
In the past years, the Ministry of Economy led reforms in 3 areas to have healthy public accounts: an income and tax management reform, a change in the design of our national budget, and the difference between both, public debt management. To implement all of this, it was imperative to transform the budgetary process. The budgetary process that began in 2005 started with a practice that I believe was appreciated by everyone, at Parliament level in particular. Our first aim was to have a macroeconomic report of the country's financial situation as a context for what was going to be the budget proposal, and have fiscal and financial planning to prepare a budget that was consistent with what we expected would be feasible to implement. In past periods, the budget meant nothing. There was no assurance that there would be compliance with budget allocation. The Parliament approved things that were not necessarily going to be carried out, and the power was given to the Ministry of Economy and the executive power for making the necessary cuts, because it was absolutely impossible to implement budget law expenditures, and the executive power was responsible for establishing priorities. We turned that process around. Our budget formulation is now consistent with fiscal and financial planning, and political priorities are explicitly included. We created the National Budget Unit to change the way we designed and prepared the budget. The role of the National Budget Unit, UPN, was essential because it centralized in few people, technical and political leaders, who, with great effort, were able to visualize our weaknesses in terms of information and ways of working, and through external systems, but linked to the large budget implementation base of the Budget and Accounts Office, managed to simplify the whole procedure for the parties raising the proposals and for those in charge of making corrections.
The
National Budget Unit covered a need of all national budget agencies. It put a human face to a place that was not personalized.
Ponerle una cara a un lugar que no era personalizado.
I call the National Budget Unit the bad guys. They are very good people, but they are the ones who make the cuts and give us the guidelines. It is prepared, and during the next 5 years, they do the monitoring. There is a lot of control over implementation. It is very important to provide the state with institutionalization. First, to give assurance, create rules, and institutionalize compliance with rules. This is one way to strengthen the state and the institutional quality. Also, institutionalization contributes to making processes more permanent and not easily reversed. This should be a state position and not something that changes from government to government. To institutionalize the changes in the processes, it was necessary to advance and find new ways of preparing the budget. Regarding the budget process, we could say that the first budget we prepared back in 2005 was indeed very traditional, not only because of our lack of experience, but also due to the resources we had available. The people in the Budget and Accounts Office worked 24 hours a day for about 1 week. We worked long hours, starting at 8 in the morning, and some days we worked until 3 or 4 a.m., then rested 2 or 3 hours, and at 8 in the morning we were back in the office again. I remember sitting for many hours responding to the minister's request of checking if the articles were included in the budget. It became imperative to include technology in the budgetary process. I believe that we created a lot of synergy between the National Budget Unit and the National E-Government and Information Society Agency, AGESIC. The legal, regulatory, and operational frameworks that came with AGESIC were essential for conducting this whole process. They were very clear about the entire budget process and were able to simplify it as much as possible. A firm decision to move forward despite all obstacles. Since 1986, there have been resounding changes, and in the last 7 or 8 years, when the new systems were consolidated, and with the support of AGESIC, a new way of preparing the budget was quickly achieved. The change to the 5-year budget approved in 2015 was substantial. We can now monitor through a computer the status of our article from home. We can see whether it's been approved, modified. We can follow the process of a file in real time. We operate from our desks, as I say. It was different before.
dónde están los cambios.
The real changes in the budget practice are not only about the transparency of knowing that they are included in a draft budget, but rather knowing that when the budget is approved, it will be fulfilled.
Lo que dice se
This adds transparency and democracy to the process, because what is written and approved in the budget law is essentially what is implemented. A clear way of setting objectives was established within the administration. As an essential part of the transformation process, a special effort was made to improve the data provided to the Parliament, so that those responsible for analyzing and approving the budget could have more information for their appraisal. There was a significant qualitative change after 2005. I have highlighted this year after year. The economic financial report is fundamental, and in our opinion, it develops the commitments and estimates on the basis of which the executive prepares its proposal. I consider that the executive branch delivers a large amount of information that many times we do not use adequately. The real one, the main one, is the budget. The first, where the 5 years begin, where the government presents its 5-year plan. I have the impression that from the ministry's unit, they are trying to give us good information, and we must continue along those lines. I consider that many things have improved. There is a lot of complementary material for analysis. We don't have enough time to take advantage of the abundant work conducted by the Ministry of Economy and its units in the national budget delivered to Parliament. The information available every time the economic team comes to present the budget and the discussions with the economic team itself give all the legislators a much better understanding of the country's situation, the progress achieved in its program areas, and the expected results for each policy. The grounds have been laid out. Today, our achievements allow us to set new challenges to improve public resource allocation. We have managed to institutionalize the presentation and realization, and we are in a position to move forward and achieve a new stage in this period, and set the improvements for the next 5 years in terms of program costs and results obtained, regarding the effectiveness and efficiency of all implementing agencies. We must continue to promote this work along these lines in order to achieve what we are still lacking. That is, to unify the entire process, from credit allocation, establishing programs, to results obtained. As financial manager, I would demand a little more flexibility in terms of ministry management, and would immediately modify the ordered text of Financial Accounting and Administration, TOCAF. These are challenges to improve ministry management. I have a personal challenge that I haven't achieved yet, which is the implementation of results-based management in my ministry. It could work very well, and we could start with the accrual basis of accounting, which is a must for the central administration. The players suggest changes according to their point of view.
Es cambiar la perspectiva en lugar de hacer un análisis incremental.
It is about changing the perspective. Instead of making an incremental analysis of spending, referring exclusively to the increase in spending, include all that spending that has been voted for a long time and that is part of the budget, but does not externalize for discussion purposes.
No se exterioriza los efectos de una discusión.
The legislative branch has little or no preparation to study budgetary laws.
O nula preparación para desarrollar un estudio de la legislación. Creo que el diseño institucional.
The institutional design, prepared many years ago, gave independence and autonomy to the Court of Audit. In some way, it reduced the legislative power's control over the executive power.
We focus much more on articulating, which is the budgetary reform, than on accountability or analyzing budget content. If I were to give an opinion on a qualitative leap, I would say that we should move more decisively to a results-based budget, setting objective indicators to measure expenditure quality and to assess whether the money spent by the state to obtain certain objectives is fulfilled. Accountability should explain the results of budget implementation in a certain period of time and to assist in making changes where necessary, to make corrections or adjustments. It is very important to monitor implementation. We like budgets that have goals and where we can monitor if those goals are being fulfilled. This is fundamental, but it is not what we see today. Actually, what we see is the articulation that comes with accountability, the corrections and looking forward. There is no looking at the past. It's always been like that. It didn't start with this government. It has always been the same problem. 100 years ago, Uruguay challenged the world, and today we are proud of the improvements obtained. With that same spirit, institutional reforms were carried out 10 years ago, aimed at improving our country's capacity to adapt to the changes and create opportunities for the future. We created the National E-Government and Information Society Agency, Hacia, for the inclusion of technology. For equal opportunities in education, the Ceibal Plan was created. For innovation, the National Agency for Research and Innovation, ANI. The Debt Management Unit and the National Budget Unit were created to improve the country's national budget and financial management. Adequate tax and financial management is not an end in itself. It is a means for the organizations responsible for implementing public policies to do so in a foreseeable and sustainable context.
Hemos contado con el auxilio de varios de ustedes que nos ayudaron a relatar el periplo.
You have helped us to, this has helped us to tell you more or less what we've been through in the last 13 years. I would like to mention, to talk about 3 specific moments about these 13 years. We need to know where we start. And 13 years ago, at the beginning of our journey, fiscal controls were basically based on cash controls, on our financial problems. At that time, the budget was not used for everything that we needed to use it for. We did use it to plan policies, because we didn't know how much we would have, because we had ceilings and quotas. We didn't have the right provisions so that the state companies could implement their expenditure. They didn't know how much they had available, and we didn't have the right institutions to perform these activities. That is, we did not have specialized units to manage debt, budget, and for macroeconomic assessment, we had only 2 economists and 2 accountants for everything they had to do. So clearly, you can see that there was a lack of resources. And the resources that we have now are clearly much greater. And at that time, maybe some of you remember our discussions. We were discussing about payments, cash, debts with suppliers. This is not an issue right now anymore. Now we have moved on. And this structure that we had at that time, that was, of course, affected by the 2002 crisis that really conspired against a more efficient management practice. Where are we now? We have now fiscal control is based on budget, so the focus move from the expenditure to the budget, and the budget has a macroeconomic and fiscal midterm framework, and the fiscal responsibilities were taken on because we thought so, and not because of the pressure we had from international organizations. We tried to align them with the fiscal result that could be very easy and obvious to you, but for us it was a lot of work. The integration of the fiscal strategy and the debt management were also essential to be able to implement our policies accordingly. We provided specific institutions for that, and we strengthened the capacities in that areas. We created new units to do that. We incorporated technology to incorporate the processes. That is, we incorporated technology and we were able to transform the processes for budget, design, modification, analysis, and cash planning. We also provided a payment plan, and we were able to set a horizon of 1 year, and the different divisions know the payments they will be able to make in the next 12 months. And the Treasury worked on modernizing the checks, being able to pay directly, electronically through the banks, and strengthening the single account system. We improved the budgeting reform office, where we transformed the budgeting structure, and we have simplified the regulations and procedures so as to eliminate the transactions regarding income. We need to also mention that public policies have been included and analyzed, which of course has had an impact in better practices and better transfers to Parliament and to the population as a whole. This pathway that seems easy was difficult to carry out, and it provided better and more efficient public management practice. Let's see now where we are now, and how we see the future. Because we moved on in all of these areas, we were able to set new challenges that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. Now, I understand that we are in a position to do that. It's necessary to do that to continue to improve the public management practices in general. Today, we have a structure that we know that it works, but we should ask, is our present structure appropriate? I think it's not appropriate, and I'm going to tell you why. Probably most of you should agree that we get too involved in what we do, and you're right. Probably you should also recognize that our resources sometimes are not enough for the most sensitive areas. This, of course, is something that we need to recognize. And these two situations lead to a structure that is natural, because the ministries have to display policies and put pressure for more resources. And on our side, we are more aware of the restrictions and the need to have sustainable public accounts so as to ensure continuity of public policies. This role allocation is probably not the best. And of course, the legislators are also right when they say that they discuss more about budget modifications and the content. We also need to provide more appropriate information so that we can inform their discussions towards the more essential issues. So I understand that we do have right now a balance that does work, but has to be transformed, especially the transformation of all organizations participating in this process. And for that, we need to strengthen credibility in the general budgeting allocation. So we can start by the executive branch. The executive branch of government is the one that defines results and priorities, and we need to strengthen both. We need to define the expected results. That involves more knowledge on how the public goods are produced, and to be able to define the results expected and the actions to be taken. And sometimes our sectorial priorities are not necessarily led by results, which weakens the feedback process regarding results and allocations. And we basically still have an institutional allocation of resources, and we need to discuss this. What we're saying is that this requires a huge effort from the executive units, especially for them to incorporate the budgetary restrictions, and that they focus by results. That is, that they can manage in order to reach certain results, and that means that they need to specifically know the output chain, the outputs and the outcomes at each institutional level. This is important in all the sections, because from the combination of both, it is that we will implement this permanent work of checking what we're doing and checking how we can improve it. Not just incremental allocation, but all resources. And right now, all the public organizations are not in a position to deal with this. They are all working with this objective, but we're still far from reaching it. And in order to implement this, we need more resources, more training. And as you know, in the state management systems, we have the significant efforts of a few that work a lot and not always have the appropriate resources. We had the situation of in 2015 where several organizations presented that they needed more resources to implement their activities better. So from the budgeting unit at that time, we started to make out an action plan, and we implemented a program to be able to support the systems and capacity building in the ministries. Access to this program is voluntary. Projects are presented. We support them in terms of funding, but mainly and this is not the most important. We support them through capacity building, management practices, relationships with the IT companies, with the bidding processes, and the relationships with the transversal organizations working, or cross-cutting organizations working in the projects. This is a process that we just started. Our strategy is quite different from the one that other countries have taken, because we're trying to develop customized systems for each organization, because we know that they are the ones that know their action areas, and if they participate in their execution, they can make sure that the system is useful and could be incorporated in decision making. Otherwise, with a centralized system, it's harder to be able to adapt it to their needs. That's why our strategy is very different from the strategy of the rest of the countries in the region. We have a more more federal approach. In our case, we are working towards generating strategies in the sections, because we are convinced that this is the only way in which information can actually be reliable and timely, because it comes from the management systems and not from the administrative systems. This is the support that we're building. We're still far. We need to continue to work in this. We also need to transform the way they work. I mean by this, transversal organizations like the Ministry, civil service, and peer organizations. Why do I say that we need to still transform transversal management practices? Because we need to continue to strengthen the commitment with the credibility and budgetary restrictions, also at aggregated level. That is our level. And this requires more information. The information that we have now is basically fiscal and budgetary information. We were able to relate them, but we still have more. We need to still provide accounting information that we don't have. The government does not have equity accountancy systems, but I believe that these general accountancy systems used the internationally accepted standards are essential to have a clear idea, to have an idea of the assets and liabilities and contingencies faced by the state in this case. So the three pillars, fiscal, budget information on one hand, and accountancy systems are essential to develop an economic system and to work towards accountability in these areas. At state level, we're trying to do that through the SIF systems. This is one of the outputs that we will be able to obtain through SIF, and we will be able to overcome some of the problems that SIF have, for example, in terms of foreign currency. Because with the present SIF, if you want to see credit, for example, for next year, then the answer will be come next year, and that is it's very difficult to make management decisions like this. We have internally devised a system that enables us to forecast the credit, to plan the cash in the system for several years. But this is an internal process. The organizations still need to use spreadsheets to be able to forecast. And what we still need to generate more information is to set new mechanisms and more information that the organizations provide to the transversal organizations, so as to have a better knowledge of what we do and how we do it, not to have an influence on what is done, because I understand that this is not our area, but yes, to have an impact on how it is done, to be able to assess if things are being carried out efficiently or not. And this requires us to supplement all the activities being carried out by the ministries or by the sections. Parliament as transversal organizations, we should be able to provide more information to Parliament. That doesn't mean that we need to send more information. It means that we need to send more appropriate information, more accurate, that gradually focuses towards strategies, results, and goals. This is a very complex process. We are taking the first steps based on what we were able to build until now. We still have a long way to go, and all of this will work if we are able then to improve the management by results. And this enables us to join all of these actions that I mentioned. That is, we still have additional complications, additional to the ones on the screens. We have problems with the budget in terms of feedback of the allocations and outputs. That is weaker than it should be. The allocations are there for 5 years, but how can we implement this budget by objectives with a 5-year budget? The same or similarly, we have the role of Parliament in terms of the information that they provide and how they meet the objectives that they have set for themselves. And lastly, we have some rigidities in terms of the zero-item management that always requires additional funding that is very specific and is surprising to some of the organizations that are analyzing us. What I wanted to briefly share with you is what is the process that we have carried out, where we are now, and where we see the strategy for the future. I understand that you, each of you, from your different positions, you should be able to understand your areas from your perspectives, but it's important to see the whole of the process in order to generate awareness of the whole of the process and to see how you can personally contribute to the implementation of the whole. I hope that I could contribute to your understanding of the whole and to your understanding of how the whole pathway has worked and will continue to work.